brings together everything that we've been talking about today, which is how do we put this vision, the goals of the case for quality, the aspirations for all the stakeholders that we've been talking about, how does it all come together and what does it look like in motion? So I'm delighted to be able to share with you the project leads of our two work streams that are in place under the Case for Quality, and that is our analytics project and our maturity module projects. They're going to be sharing with you updates on where they are, what they see in terms of their deliverables and their time frame. I'm going to introduce both teams at the same time. They'll both be sharing some presentations, and then if time permits, we'll hopefully we'll be able to take a few questions for you as well. So up first, representing our analytics work team is Mike Schiller, who was on our panel before from ARM, from the industry side, and Dan Mattis, president of Alexia. And also on the team, but not presenting today, is Ann Ferder from the FDA. Second up, you'll hear from our maturity model team, Jody Bastian from Stryker Corporation, Cisco Vicente, our program manager for Case for Quality, and George Serafin, our moderator on our panel today from US Global. So Mike and Dan, take us away.
Great. Thanks, Beth. Okay. Adrian, I see Adrian smiling. We had a team meeting yesterday, since there were a number of us here that were present for getting ready for this meeting. And we talked collectively as a team, and we really discussed what's our message and how do we succinctly message the goals of our project team. And initially, as we're kind of brainstorming, we had 3 pages. And Adrian's like, you know, this is great, but how do you take this to senior leadership? And so wanted to touch on the goal of our product outcomes analytics team, and it's really to develop a medical device quality dashboard that will guide purchasing decisions. And so as a team, before I jump off of this slide, I mentioned earlier, and I think it bears repeating, part of this analytics comes into play. This dashboard requires unbiased information. It requires reliable information, requires consistent information, it requires information that everybody agrees with as far as measurements, metrics, how we are measuring the different areas of performance on the medical devices. So here's our project charter. There'll be a test at the end to see how many of you know and can memorize every aspect of this charter. But really, it's a bit of an eye chart, but I do want to touch on the key objectives there. And again, it's developing the methods and a proof of concept dashboard that compares the device-related experience and patient outcome for healthcare provider stakeholders using this data. So when we talk about the purchasing, the use of this data to guide purchasing decisions, it's really the purchasing decisions on the healthcare provider side of the equation. And again, as I'd mentioned earlier, we've got some very educated individuals that are looking at this information and are using it to assess what products make sense to be used. Now, one thing I think we need to keep in mind is that this is not a one-size-fits-all model, that there are a number of other factors that come into play when we're talking about outcomes. Certainly we're focused on the device aspect, but there's also the clinical care pathways that are utilized in the care continuum setting, and there's also the patient engagement component. And then drilling down from that aspect, if you start to think from a patient population perspective, analytics begin to give us insight into chronic health conditions and certain treatment plans, pharma plans, clinical plans, engagement plans that may benefit this segment in that chronic care condition population. And there could be an entirely different set of approaches that are taken with another segment of population within that same chronic condition. We think about diabetes or COPD or others. So the analytics are extremely important. Now, we're not going to be able to bring all of those different segments into play in the dashboard, but being a type A group, we're certainly going to give it our best. And Dan's going to cover some of the sub-teams that we've developed and broken off into to try and bring as many of these different data sets into the dashboard to make it as useful a tool as possible. So, notes from our breakout session back in March. A lot of thought clouds here. We're going to drill into some of these as we go through the rest of these slides. One, though, I do want to point out here towards the bottom of the screen, is the analytics vision the same across device classes? So we'll touch on a slide here in just a moment regarding some of the care domains that we've identified, quality domains that we've identified here. But within those 7 that we've identified, not every one of those may pertain to each and every device class. There may be some that might be more relevant to others. And so that's an important component to consider as we begin to look at creating this dashboard and determining which one of those quality domains really makes the most sense. Now, the products we've centered on for phase 2 are endo-surgical mesh and vascular grafts. Sorry, I've got so many different projects that I'm working on. I can't keep them all straight. Phase 1, we focused on class 3 implants. We focused on knees and CRD. And again, I just mentioned the ones that we're focused on here for phase 2. So improving data sources and increasing collaboration. Phase 1, we had some really good collaboration across the healthcare ecosystem. With phase 2, that's increased. I want to say we've probably tripled the size of our team and the engagement across all the important industry stakeholder segments. If you think about the supplier community, think about the healthcare representatives. We've got some patient advocacy groups that we're working with. We've increased the number of registries that we're working with here. And so we've got the logo list here of all of the folks that are engaged with us. And we've got, I think, 9 healthcare providers that are engaged. We're actually working with some of those healthcare providers to integrate data from their EHRs and bring that into the dashboard. Again, looking for multiple sources of data that can give us a more unbiased look at the performance of the medical device. So measuring product quality. I mentioned we had developed and defined 7 key quality metrics. The list was much larger than 7, but during the course of phase 1, this was really one of the first steps that we engaged in as a team. If you asked everybody around the table at that point in time, define quality, you'd have a different perspective, a different picture of what quality meant. So we had much more, a larger list than this, I should say, but then as we began to engage the stakeholders in vetting and finalizing and refining this list, again, the value analysis professionals and our supplier partners, we landed on the 7 that you see here from a quality domain. Now, what's important is really, I had mentioned early on here at the start of this presentation, the need to have a set of metrics that everybody can agree to. The data is not as valuable if there's a lack of trust in how it's being measured or how it's being used, and we'll touch on that in just a moment. So it was really important as a team, number 1, to define what is quality. Now, within each one of these quality metrics, we're beginning to drill down a little bit. So when we talk about safety, what does safety mean? When we talk about reliability, what does reliability mean? And the goal here is to add some key qualifiers, if you will, to these metrics that will be agreeable across the healthcare ecosystem so that when we say reliability, everybody's in alignment and understands that when we're looking at reliability within the context of this dashboard, this is what we mean. So how does the medical device industry use product quality? So the 2 boxes here are how the medical device industry, our suppliers, are utilizing this information. The key here that I'd like to focus on, just in the interest of time, is the link between product quality, outcome analytics, and the maturity model. We had a call the other week with the steering committee, and one of the questions posed to us was if we were to go to healthcare provider organizations and talk about CMMI, how would that resonate? And At this point in time, I don't know that a lot of organizations would grasp what CMMI is. They might think it's the Center, Medicare, Medicaid Innovation Center, right? Because when I heard CMMI, that's right where my mind went. So I think there's an education process that needs to take place. There's a communication process that needs to take place where we begin to start to connect these dots. I think one of the big challenges for the healthcare provider is they are so in the weeds. They're seeing the trees and they're not seeing the forest. And I think it's our responsibility as leaders that have the opportunity to see the entire ecosystem, if you will, to begin to connect the dots for them. So connecting outcome analytics with the maturity model is going to be an important message that we need to begin to bring to the healthcare community. And with that, I will turn it over to Dan to talk a little bit about the subgroup teams, again, that we've broken into to try to bring those different data elements into the dashboard.
Thank you, Mike. So Mike reminded me, the forest, the trees. I had a mentor when I first started at J&J, and she used to tell me all the time, Dan, bark marks. And, forest, trees, sometimes you're so close to the tree that you have bark marks on your forehead. And that's the way she used to, remind me that you need to step back. The challenge, I think, is all of us have bark marks, but we're all leaning against a different tree. And the challenge is not so much that we don't have enough data. We have tons of data. I bet that if I go back to my old employer, or I actually know for a fact, if I go back to my old employer, I could find the data that we started collected on a particular process 27 years ago. But it's just there collecting digital dust because nobody's done anything with it. So what we need to do is move up from, from that data, the information, the knowledge, the wisdom, and ultimately we need to make patient decisions based on truths rather than data, because data is data, and you can make it say many different things depending on how you look at it. So what we're trying to do is, if you look at the progression this morning when we talked about NEST, and we talked about this during our meeting yesterday without knowing what was going to be presented, many of the things align so well. So what we've done is we looked at the project status, and we've broken it down into different sub-teams, and we're trying to understand, what are the different players, what are the different roles. So I'm not going to read through each one of these, but one of the things we did is we broke it down, and one of the teams is a registry team. And these folks are going out and trying to find registries, that are relevant to the two products that we're trying to gather data on so that we can analyze and come up with information and truths so that we can help make decisions. So we're actually reached out to a number of those. The big challenge here is everybody wants to get paid for their data. So how do we fund that? That is one of the challenges when it comes to this. We have one of the other things I wanted to point out, and something that Ann mentioned yesterday, is this is not an FDA-driven activity. If you look at the members, you can see that it represents the vast majority of the ecosystem around healthcare. The other team that we broke into is the healthcare provider team, because we recognize that if you're looking for information around what the outcomes are from a provider standpoint, you need to get the providers in the room. And we've actually, as Mike mentioned, our goal was to get maybe a couple of healthcare organizations, and we're up to 9. And it's wonderful to see the level of engagement and interest from healthcare providers. They're volunteering to say, oh, we want patient information. Well, maybe if we connect you to this person and that data person, we might be able to get you some of the things or some of the information that you don't currently have. So it's been wonderful to engage with the healthcare providers and get their perspective on what does product quality mean. The other team is the dashboard and analysis team, and really the goal for this team is to gather insight and data and the formulas. So how do we turn that data ultimately into those facts? And what are the right, what is a standardized approach? One of the things we're trying to do is we're not trying to, our goal ultimately is not to come up with a dashboard. Here you go, here's a dashboard that you can use. Our goal, the dashboard is a pilot to prove that it can be done. Our intent is to come up with the definitions for those 7 dimensions of quality, which we've done at a high level, and to bring it down into a standardized approach that regardless of who calculates any one of those 7 dimensions, they'll get the same answer, assuming that they're operating, again, the same data set. So that's what that team is working towards, understanding, and then looking at data that already exists. So we did some brainstorming, and Nathan actually did some correlation between what the 7 data elements, or the 7 attributes for quality in RAPID to be able to identify, can we get some of this data from information that already exists at the FDA and or other data sources. The other team is the patient perspective team, and this has been a little bit of a challenge because the products that we identified, it's hard for a patient to tell you at a detailed level the outcome. So what we're trying to identify is what perhaps are some of the dimensions of quality that would be most relevant to a patient. And I know I'm going to connect with some of the folks that were on the panel earlier because there's a lot of opportunity. They have a lot of the data. If they already crunched it, let's figure out how we can connect and feed it into our model. And that was the end of the update as far as what the teams are. So just to very quickly wrap it up, our goal, our intent is to look at outcome data and be able to identify what are how to measure those 7 dimensions of quality and how to bring them together so that ultimately we can make, or the providers can make patient decisions based on facts that are available, or the best facts that are available.
For a few minutes for questions?
Sure, that would be great. Did we knock it out of the park and you guys got this rock solid understanding? It is. It was that one succinct phrase. We should put that back up, yeah.
Mike and Dan, during the panel discussion, we talked about the themes of trust and transparency, of independence of the data. And one of the principles I know that you've been working around for this project is for the data sources to be primarily independent of the manufacturers. And we've had some good discussions about the role of the manufacturers might still play in here on the steering committee. Could you talk about maybe the latest thinking about how manufacturers might I don't mean participate in the project, but as you envision the scorecards coming out, what is the role of manufacturers, if any, in your mind as the data starts to become available?
So, I mean, we're still working through that.
Yeah.
One of the challenges is, or one of the realities is manufacturers have a lot of data about their particular products. And I think it would be very helpful to bring that into the process. The opposite, or the challenge is, how do you make sure that that data is unbiased? So we're wrestling, or we're dealing with that situation and that issue. We understand that, or we want to get as much of that data as possible, but we need to make sure that it's apples-to-apples comparisons. And I think Ann has...
Wait, I wanted to, if I could...
Go ahead.
That's a great question. So I guess I want to make sure, because I know we've got a fairly strong representation here from our supplier partners, that it's not that data is not relevant or useful. But that's one data set, and what we want to do and hope to do is to be able to augment that data set with other data so that it paints a much richer and more comprehensive picture. Similar to putting on my supply chain hat, cost is great, was great, but cost alone is no longer the way to just look at product decisions. So I think that the manufacturers have a tremendous amount of knowledge and information to bring to the table. It's just how do we augment that so that we can neutralize the concern right now that we've heard very loud and clear from our value analysis partners that it's too biased right now. Our access to information, the information we have access to is too biased. So hopefully that you know, we don't want to discount any of the information you guys have. You're super valuable partners on the project.
And let's go 2 more slides forward. Keep going. One more. Perfect. So we see industry not just as a data source, but really as a partner in the intelligence. Industry is already mining electronic health records and looking at registry. And how is industry doing that on the pre-market side? What kind of calculations are they using? They're looking at safety and efficacy just like we are. So let's have a consistent way of analyzing that data, of using similar data sources. Let's learn from what you all are already doing. We've got a team of 40 volunteers who we rope into, you know, 8 hours a week of work, which is great, but there are other people in industry that's their full-time job, and so we should definitely leverage the experience that they have. So that's number 1 is lessons learned from industry. But then also, if we're going to look at that paradigm of the maturity model and product outcome analytics, we would expect that firms are using that outcome data to drive decisions, to drive their design decisions, their manufacturing decisions, their marketing decisions. So they're taking product quality outcome analytics as an input, and then through the maturity model, they're engaging in practices that influence those outcomes. So we should see a virtuous circle here. We should see the maturity model measuring things that have an impact on patient outcome, and we should see patient outcome driving practices that further improve. So we're looking for industry to be very strong partners in both the development of the analytical tools, but also in the use of the data. Maybe less as a partner for a data source independently, but definitely as a source for how do we look at it and how do we use it.
And I guess just to kind of cap off that thought, thank you, Ann, is there's been a common theme of concern from phase 1 into phase 2 and how this information will be used. And so it's the interpretation of the information, and we want to make that, limit that confusion or broadly interpreted data, and we would really look to the supplier partners to help us define, again, as we look at these quality metrics, how can we all look at that quality metric of reliability and all come to an agreement and be comfortable so that from a supplier perspective, if a healthcare professional is looking at that, you're comfortable that everybody's interpreting reliability the same way. So that's another important aspect that the supplier partners bring to the project.
I was going to ask a similar question. You almost answered it spot on, which is that some of those metrics are very closely related to manufacturing quality. The direct measures of product performance, for example, mean time between failure or whatever they might be. Others, like adverse events, have so many influencing factors. Has your model anticipated the relative proximity to what's under the manufacturer's control, or is that being accounted for in any way?
So what we did is we tried to take a holistic view of quality, again, from the outcome perspective. So some of the metrics are, you know, your tradition or your historical safety and effectiveness and reliability, which are more related to manufacturing. But we also looked at things like patient satisfaction, so that we try to balance the scorecard or the model to focus on what the outcome will be for the patient. Now, if you don't have a high quality, if you don't manufacture a high quality device, then you're not going to meet, or it's less likely that you will be able to meet some of the outcome metrics. It's possible. You know, we talked yesterday, you know, 100%, but if it's 1 out of 1, it's 100%. So how do we measure, or how do we manage through that? So our intent was, again, to try to do a holistic approach, and a lot of the input came from the VICs, right? So from the purchasing organizations, we had a number of meetings, and we had a survey that went out, and we looked at what are the metrics that are important to them, in addition to the metrics that are important to the other constituents.
And I guess I would add to that, you know, that's probably the million-dollar question, is bringing these other elements that affect outcomes. As I'd mentioned, there's the clinical care pathways that each organization takes, and then there's the patient engagement. Are they following up with their doctor? Are they taking their meds? Are they adhering to their diet? So I think that what you can see here with our subgroups is we're trying to bring those data elements in. I think longer term, and I offer this up for consideration to the group, you know, the patient aspect is a kind of a nebulous area, and how do we get at some of that unstructured data? And I think there's potential in the social media realm and other websites. Sometimes people may not say what they want to say with their physician, but when they're hanging out with their group of friends, sometimes you get the real truth, or the truth comes out. And so is there an opportunity to perhaps mine some of those social data sets? It's unstructured data, granted, but is there an opportunity there to at least get a glimpse into some of the patient perspectives as well, and what the outcomes are to the patient?
All right. Well, we want to make sure and give our other working groups some time to chime in. So Mike and Dan, thank you very much.
Thank you.